if a municipality is interested in attracting and retaining good managers, I think that it behooves them to make sure that they understand these, why these provisions that we're talking about in the contract are necessary.
You are listening to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. Twice each month, Gregg and Jae Goodchow draw on their combined 80-plus years of state and local government work experience to help listeners avoid the pitfalls they and others have unwittingly stumbled into. And now, on to the episode.
Welcome everyone again. This is Manager Brothers Lessons Learned, and I am Jae Goodchow.
And I am Gregg Goodchow, his older brother.
And smarter brother, some might say, but we could debate that. So.
And shorter brother, and the shorter brother.
That's true. I've always maintained that we are equal intelligence. It's just that because I'm a foot taller, it's spread thinner than your intelligence.
It might be. Maybe you just have a bigger brain. So
it could be the lack of oxygen from the higher elevation, perhaps. I have no idea.
I suspect, Jay, that it's the fact that all of your words, all of the words of wisdom that you have, just go right over the top of people's heads because you're so tall. And so they just never settle in. So I think you're probably a lot smarter than a lot of people give you credit for, just because they just have no idea. They've completely missed all the things that you're saying. Whereas with me, I'm right down at a somewhat lower level.
Yeah, I just never thought that I was disadvantaged in that way.
Well, now you know. Now you know.
It's true. It's about time I learned that.
We've probably had the conversation about your finding it easy to reach the things at the back of the shelves at Myers and that sort of stuff. So.
Yes, I've been known to be helpful to some people that are challenged that way. So
I'll call you up the next time I have to go shopping.
Okay, very good. I've even helped employees from time to time. So, well, anyway.
Well, Jay, we were going to this is going to be our last episode looking at issues in manager contracts. And I know you wanted to lead off with talking a little bit about the duration of contracts as one of those kind of, not so much of a fine print item, but nevertheless an issue that managers should think seriously about as they're entering into a contract.
Well, yes, and I've had situations that have been year-to-year type contracts, and I have seen in some charters where they had a limit of 6 years for the manager's contract. Mm-hmm. I don't have a magic number in mind. I know from my prior experience when I was working with state government and handling contracts that state contracts were for no more than 3 years. And I, in the one municipality where I was an elected official, I kind of brought this to the table for discussion because they had auditors and a municipal attorney that had been in those roles for, I would say decades in some cases, and it had never been, the contract had never really been reviewed per se or put out for bid. And I think that there's some healthy reasons for putting that out to bid, because you can get lackadaisical if you aren't reviewing the qualifications, for those services, and you're not looking at, comparing credentials and with others in that profession. So in both cases, I think that it resulted in those services being put out for bid. I think they ended up with perhaps the same providers, as it were, and it created a little bit of angst. I think that I should raise that issue that we were dissatisfied, but I just think that it helps to revisit contracts from time to time. So
right, and I think that I have seen charter provisions that indicate that managers are appointed for indefinite terms. And you can, in theory then, if you have no other contract limitations in a charter, for example, you could end up with a contract that could go for a long period of time. And one of the dangers of that is just what you indicate, that we can, if I'm the manager and my contract is just kind of out there, and periodically it gets amended to to increase compensation or change benefits or whatever it might be, but I don't take a look at the rest of the provisions, there's some potential pitfalls for that. You're not reviewing those. Some of them may have implications that you hadn't really thought about. And particularly if you have a situation, for example, where you've got a good relationship with the council and you come to believe that that's going to go on forever, mistaken belief that any of us could have when we're in a situation where things are going well, but then you never revisit the separation provisions of the contract, the termination provisions of the contract, or the severance pay provisions of the contract. That can come back and bite you in that kind of a circumstance.
Yes, and we've talked in previous episodes about what can happen sometimes after an election, and you have a change on your village or city council. What kind of impact that might have on the municipal manager, and I think the contract should address some of those, some of the concerns, so you aren't so much apt to have been caught by surprise, I guess, after an election.
Yeah, getting back to the idea of a contract for an appointment for an indefinite term in conjunction with a contract, that's an area where it's maybe helpful to ensure that any provisions like that are first known. So let's say that, I worked in a community that actually had a provision that said that the manager is appointed for an indefinite term, but elsewhere in the charter it indicates that, no contract can be entered into for a duration longer than 10 years without submitting it to a vote of the public. Well, what does that mean? I don't think that was contemplated as an employment contract, and the charter was written before managers could have employment contracts in Michigan. Is there a conflict between those two provisions? Is there a way to make sure that those provisions harmonize? I think that, again, it's one of those reasons to make sure that you know what you're getting into, you've read the charter provisions, you've talked to an attorney and so forth, to make sure that you're not creating a situation where somebody can later on come along and invalidate the contract, saying this was an illegal contract, was entered into for an indefinite term, when we do have this provision in the charter that says you can't have a contract for longer than 10 years.
Well, and I don't think that what we're talking about is that much different than why there are requirements to review your master plan every 5 years, or why you should periodically review your code of ordinances, because we're not in I guess we're not in a state where it's constant. It's constant change, I guess, is what what I'm trying to say here.
Right.
So you have to review, whether it's different legislation that might be at the state level that's going to impact on the local municipality, and those particular documents. And one of those documents that I think needs to be reviewed is the manager contract.
Right. A couple of other provisions, as long as we're talking about reviewing contracts and looking at some of the fine print items, one of the things that I have seen in terms of language that can be problematic in contracts for managers is the breach of contract language. And I've seen this done both well and poorly. I'll describe the poorly first, and we can kind of use that as the basis for talking about how it should be done. But I saw a provision in a manager contract that basically it said that if there is a breach of the contract, that was grounds for denying the manager the severance pay if the contract is terminated for that reason. And breach of contract was not defined, and more to the point, there was not a time offered under that breach language for the manager to correct that. And typically what you'd want to see in a contract where there is breach of contract language, and I think that's a good boilerplate provision to have in any contract, but what one would like to see if there's breach of contract language is, first of all, it applies to both parties, but it applies to both parties in the way that there is a requirement that specific notice is given of a possible breach, and that the other party then has the opportunity to correct that breach. This was completely missing in the contract that I reviewed, the employment contract that I reviewed, and I think that it's one of these things that ends up then being fairly arbitrary on the part of the employer. They can assert a breach and be done with it, and now you're in a situation where you end up in court, battling a former employer because they denied you severance over a breach that you didn't even know had occurred. And I think that there's always the potential, depending on the structure of contracts, that provisions get overlooked. You forget what's in. This goes back to never reviewing your contract. You forget what's in there, and all of a sudden, you failed to give the council the weekly report one week, and that constitutes the breach of the contract. And so, it's those kinds of things that you want to safeguard against by making sure that you're aware that provision is in there, and that you're not accidentally stumbling over it at some point in time.
And I think that breach of contract should be differentiated from discussion about talking about dismissing a manager for cause versus without cause, I guess, and the impact that it has on a possible severance pay. Severance compensation in that case. So, breach is a little, like you say, less defined oftentimes.
Right. And the contract that I'm thinking of specifically had the language in the for-cause termination standard, and along with all of the usual things, getting convicted of a felony, and whatever else people want to lump into reasons to deny. And I shouldn't discount it. There are good reasons why an employer should not be required to provide severance pay to a manager for certain types of actions and behaviors that are illegal or unethical, creating a hostile work environment. Whatever those kinds of things are, we certainly should not expect that if the manager engages in that kind of conduct, that the council, upon dismissing the individual from employment, is entitled to, also has to pay them severance pay under those circumstances. That just seems to me to be unreasonable. But this was lumped in with all of those usual standards. This was this was added in as a basis for denying severance, that a simple breach of contract. And so it can be the most minor of provisions, but it gets pointed to that's a breach of contract, and so you're fired, and we're not going to pay you compensation. And I think that it's that kind of loose language that managers should be aware of at the outset when they're looking at that contract. Make sure that they, things get tightened up, and that they're not, so advantageous to the employer in a circumstance like that.
Well, and I would like to just offer, maybe it's a good point to interject this too. We're talking a lot from the perspective of the municipal manager, but I think there's some benefit in the council elected officials, that is, to understand why we're talking about this, and why it's important to understand this language, because you want, if the municipality is interested in attracting and retaining good managers, I think that it behooves them to make sure that they understand these, why these provisions that we're talking about in the contract are necessary.
Yeah, and the other side of that, and I think going right along with what you're saying, Jay, is that if a council is able to easily make cavalier decisions without thinking about the long-term costs or long-term ramifications of those decisions, they can terminate a manager and then find it very difficult to hire somebody else to take that role. People, there aren't very many managers around. We talk to one another. Everything gets published in the paper. It's very easy to find out that a council is, gone off on in a strange direction, and then managers are going to say, "Is that a place that I really want to work?" And I've seen this over the course of my career. I have seen communities that have gained reputations, maybe in some cases deservedly, and in other cases, it might have applied to a council in the past, and the council's changed and it was no longer applicable to that council, but it explains why it is that certain communities find it difficult to attract good managers, and it's because good managers don't want to go to work for people who don't show them the kind of respect for their professionalism and for the, what the job means and how they should be treated and so forth.
Well, yeah, I have to agree. Are these the municipal managers' jobs?
Of course, you have to agree.
Well, no, I don't. I don't have to agree.
Oh.
But municipal managers' jobs are challenging in and of themselves, and that's kind of I think that's an attraction for me. I like those challenges. I like to be able to solve those challenges,
right.
And I like that things are different from one day to the next. I don't like that. I wouldn't like that routine, I don't think. But the municipalities need to understand that there's a need not to make the job more challenging than it already is, and by developing some reputations that are going to be, a turnoff for prospective managers. So
right.
you want to, we want to help municipalities create an environment that is positive and would be of benefit when it comes to recruiting and retaining the next manager.
By the same token, I think that if we're able to identify some issues that help managers generally as a group make good choices about what goes into contracts, for example, that then has the advantage of, for the next employee, the next manager that follows that individual. I think a lot of communities, when they're considering what kind of a contract proposal they're going to put in front of a manager, they start with whatever they had before. And so to the extent that you've got good language that is built into a contract, not only does it help you, but it helps the people that follow you, because that becomes the de facto standard for that community. Particularly in a situation where a manager has good service, has a good harmonious relationship with the council. They want somebody just like the person that's leaving. They don't want to get rid of they would prefer not to have to go through the process of replacing this person that they've developed a good working relationship with. But people move on. They retire. Right. Or they go on to the next job, and they want to hire somebody that in many respects is just like the person that left. And if they can find that person, then they're going to want to put the same contract in front of them. So the way we do our jobs as managers has an effect on the people that follow us in these positions.
Right, as it should. And we haven't mentioned yet, I don't think, that the municipal attorney would be a good person to either have them write the contract, or at least review the contract, and certainly review updates to the contract for the next manager coming in the door.
Yep, absolutely.
We'll return to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned in a moment. Do you have a topic you would like Greg and Jae to explore? Are you interested in being a guest on Lessons Learned? Do you have comments about this episode? You can write Greg and Jae using the contact form at greggllc.com/lessons. That's greggllc.com/lessons.
Well, one other area that I want to talk about, and I know, Jay, I think you had another one too, is looking at the indemnification language that is in contracts. The purpose of the indemnification language is to ensure that when a manager is there working on behalf of the municipality, that actions that are taken by the manager are defended by the municipality in the event that there's a lawsuit. And that lawsuit might be something that comes, months or years after a manager has completed his or her service in that community. And so it's an area that looks like it, and you'll typically find indemnification language in those last paragraphs, with all the rest of the boilerplate language. But it's one that, you want to make sure to take a look at and make sure that it is written in a manner that guarantees that the municipality is going to indemnify you and hold you harmless and defend you in the event of a lawsuit. Now, there may well be stipulations so that if the manager is engaged in, an illegal act or in some other manner is behaving in a manner inconsistent with what a professional should be doing, and is just doing the wrong things, if there's gross misconduct of some kind, then denying coverage as a result of a lawsuit that grows out of that conduct is certainly understandable. But absent that, if a manager is doing the job that he or she is supposed to do, then there should be the expectation that the municipality will defend and provide representation for the manager should there be a lawsuit come somewhere down the road.
Yeah, and I think, none of us are exempt from making mistakes, unfortunately, and we do make mistakes periodically, and it's just a matter of, if it's anything short of gross negligence, obviously there's a little bit of wiggle room, I should say, on how the municipality is going to support the manager. I guess they have to understand at some point that the manager may make some mistakes, but that's where the good communication comes in as well.
Right. So. And I've been in a situation. This was a couple of communities ago, but I left the community, and there had been an issue that I had been involved in just as I was concluding my services there, and there was a lawsuit that resulted. Now, and I was a named party to that lawsuit. Now, I don't know how that ever got resolved, but I was confident leaving that municipality that whatever lawsuit was going to, whatever the progress of that lawsuit, that they were going to provide representation and shield me from any any financial harm that might result from that.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. We are tend to be a litigious society right now, and it's this isn't something that has happened overnight. It's just that it's become increasingly the case. So unfortunately, we have to always be aware of why it's important to have that indemnification clause in the contract.
Right. Well, Jay, what else is on your mind as we wrap up our final conversation about, at least I hope it's our final conversation about manager contracts. There might be something that arises here that we haven't thought about that we'll need to come back and revisit. But for the most part, I think that we've pretty well covered most of the big issues.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we always leave the door open for managers to use our contact form to let us know if there's something that they want us to delve into in a little bit more depth or to revisit from time to time later on. So
or to disagree with us.
Or to disagree. Yeah, that's why I said, I've said this before. We don't have the corner on the idea market, I guess is what I want to say when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Don't tell people that.
Well, we'd like to have the corner on that market, but it hasn't.
No, we're not. Yeah, we're not that smart.
No, we're not making any money off of this podcast. So.
Well, we don't know that either.
That wasn't our intent.
No. Our whole purpose was just to get together and tell stories and laugh about about stuff and make fun of one another and that kind of stuff. So we've at least accomplished that. But we felt people were unlikely to tune in just to hear that. So we thought we had to actually add some reasonable conduct in here, reasonable content as well.
Yeah. Yes, I think we've done that. So we haven't, the phone hasn't been ringing that wants us to do, a stand-up comedy routine or anything like that. So.
No, and it's unlikely to do.
Yeah,
to do that
I
at all. So.
haven't been waiting for that. So.
Well, good. Again, if there are things that people want to call to our attention, it's easy enough to find us to be able to ask us to do that, and we're more than happy to address questions that people send us, and we will address those in a future episode if somebody reaches out to us with something they want us to clarify or a comment that they want to add.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good time to, bring up, who you have a sponsor for this one, and maybe where we're going with the next episode too.
I can do that. I do have a sponsor. This is our friends at Wiseacre Solutions. The creative minds there have come up with a brand new smartphone app that is perfectly designed for all of those people that didn't get enough ice fishing in this winter. It's a mild winter. It seems like spring has gotten here very quickly. There can't be much ice on the lakes, at least certainly not around here, and probably in most places. Well, Wiseacre Solutions has just the ticket. It's an app called Tip Up Town, and it simulates the experience of ice fishing from the comfort of home or office. The first thing a sportsman or sportswoman sees when launching the app is a full screen shot of a hole in the ice with a fishing line dangling in it. The howling of a winter gale can be heard in the background. At random times, your phone's haptic feedback will simulate a gentle nibble on your bait. But catching that fish requires more than just skill, and I'll explain that in just a minute. The app can be used in both solo and social modes. In solo mode, you're all alone on the ice. You earn points based on how long you use the app. When you accumulate enough, you might actually land a big one, but there are no guarantees. In social mode, you're connected to other app users in real time. You can earn additional points by the messaging feature of the app, using that to tell stories about the lunker that got away. If your fellow fisher folk find your story compelling, they can donate some or all of their points to you, increasing your odds of fishing success. So if this appeals to you, if you want to have the fun of doing some ice fishing without getting cold and chasing down to chase down that trophy fish, download the free Tip Up Town app by Wiseacre Solutions today.
Well, that becomes kind of exciting as a person who likes to fish. I'm not an avid ice fisherman. I've gotten to the point where I don't like the cold so much, even though I've lived my life in Michigan where it's cold for half the year. But I would observe, though, that this is sounds like a great app, and I'm going to suggest that they even use AI to perhaps give, as part of this program or application, give the perspective from the fish's point of view. You can, you be able to see that hole in the ice from what it looks like underneath, and the bait dangling down, and maybe the fish could get some points.
I think that makes good sense. That makes good sense. Hey Jay, have I ever told you my theory about why I would not ever want to own a fish finder?
No, I don't think I've ever heard about this.
Well, fish finders, of course, are used by fishermen. They go out and they've got one on the boats, and they can kind of tell where schools of fish are. And I have this theory that if you're out there fishing and you don't have a fish finder, and the fish are not biting and you don't catch any, you can blame the fish. But if the fish are out there and you see them on the fish finder and you still don't catch any, then it's your fault. And so I would much rather that on those days when I'm out fishing, and there aren't very many of them, but when I'm out there fishing and I'm not catching any fish, it's the fish's fault. It's not my fault. I've done everything I can do, but it's the fish that are at fault. They've decided they just don't want to bite that day.
Well, you remember our one grandfather was an avid fisherman, and I probably asked this of him several times. He would come in from fishing, and I would say, "How was the fishing?" And he always said, "The fishing is great." the catching was not so good. So I always remember that. So
Well, I'm not sure I heard that story before.
oh, maybe I'm the only one that asked him.
Well, no, I suspect that, like a lot of things, Jay, you and I had the very same experiences, but your memory is far better than mine, and I just didn't recall ever having heard him say that.
Yes. Yep.
Well, let's look ahead to the next episode. And subject came up here recently in a conversation I had with some council members about the relationship between council members and department heads. What kind of contacts are appropriate between elected officials, the elected council members, and the department heads that are employed by that municipality? And I would not have thought that this was a subject that there should be a lot of debate on, but apparently, based on the conversation that was had in this one community, there is. And so I think it's worthwhile. I think there are some interesting perspectives here, and I thought it was worthwhile to devote an episode to looking at some of the opportunities that are there and some of the challenges that are there in terms of that relationship where council members are talking to department heads without the manager being present.
Yeah, and I think that's a great topic for both municipal managers and the elected officials.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's things to learn on both parts there.
Yes.
Well, I think that's all I have, Jay. You got anything else that we need to share with people before we wrap up?
No, I think I've kind of wound up my day already.
All right. Well, great. We'll be back in another couple of weeks with a brand new episode then.
Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the show. Manager Brothers Lessons Learned is a production of Gregg Guidance, LLC, a multi-specialty consulting firm offering interim management, group process facilitation, workflow analysis, operational studies, and more to local governments in Michigan and beyond.